So I'm going to tell y'all a little secret that after this won't be a secret. But if you try to reach me on Friday mornings, there's a good chance I may not see your phone call for a couple hours. And it's not because I'm intentionally trying to wall myself off from the rest of the world. It's because Friday mornings are typically the time where I go out and I go do my yard work. And, you know, Friday mornings ends up being for me one of my most peaceful and relaxing times. You know, I go out, I do my yard work, get my laundry sorted. I know that some people are thinking, this sounds absolutely like the worst day of my week. But it's the one time in my week where I know that I can start something and I can finish it. Where I can say, you know, I can go from the beginning of this task and I can look at how my yard started and I can look at how it ended and I can say, and it's done, and it's finished, and it's good, and I'm not going to get a nasty gram from my HOA this week. You know, it was a half inch too tall. The joy of living in the suburbs sometimes. You know, but there is something very calming for me in the routines and in the way things are done. And, you know, have you ever had that experience where you do things a certain way and then somebody else does it a different way? You know, you followed your laundry a certain way. I'm guilty of this. I had this whole system I developed when I had you know, Aaron living with me, because I would fold his shirts one way, my shirts another way, because it's awful hard to tell the difference between his shirts and my shirts once they're folded. So I could tell very easily. And again, you develop this system, you don't think about how much it gets ingrained into your mind until, you know, somebody else comes into your life and they come in and they do something a little differently. And again, that's part of it. You can get caught up on the things that say, hey, this is what makes life really worth living, is having things folded a certain way or having things done a certain way. And yet, you know, it's awful easy to put the wrong things in the wrong level of importance. You know, it's much easier to be in that place, in our culture especially. I think it's much easier to be in that place where we play the role of the judge. And sometimes we're our own worst judges of ourselves, but it's awful easy to be in that role where we play the role of the judge. You know, I remember I was talking earlier this summer. We had the Faith, Food, and Family group, or Faith, Food, and Life groups, and one of them was talking about families. And so I was talking to the families that were assembled there, and one of the things I shared was, you know, okay, so one of the things that women get judged by an awful lot is being a mother. You know, that you're not doing it the way that someone else thinks you should be doing it. That's something that mothers get judged on an awful lot, and guess what? Fathers, they don't. Hey, you're spending time with your kids? Hey, great, go for you. But it's not that fathers don't get judged. It's not that men don't get judged. It's just that women and men get judged for different things. And so, and again, women get judged for a lot of things that are fitting into those roles of expectations of here's how you're supposed to look, here's how you're supposed to act, here's how you're supposed to do all these things, and oh, by the way, you should make it look easy. I remember a couple years ago, I got to hear Brene Brown, who's an author, who's a social worker. She does a lot of stuff who I really value, but she writes a lot about shame. And she shared the experience that when she started to work, she did only shame research on women. So what makes women feel ashamed? What makes them feel like they're worthless? And she had this experience where a man came up to her after one of her book signings and said, well, so what do you write about men? She says, well, I've never actually done any research on men. The man says, well, that's convenient. And she has this, she says, you know, has the hair stand up on the back of her neck because it's like, okay, something's important here, but something I'm also a little afraid of. You know, and so she said, well, what do you mean by that? Talk to me about that. I said, well, you know, men carry deep, deep, deep shame with them, but they can't ever talk about it. And she starts to respond. She says, no, and don't tell me it's about unloving fathers or about the coaches, because the two women who just signed your books for, my wife and my daughter, would rather see me die on my white horse than fall off. Where men feel shame and where men feel judged a lot of times is anytime you fail. And it's all over in culture as well, and I don't think people realize this. You know, over 15 years, I've done a lot of times where I've met with couples and met with people in marriage counseling at various times. And that's one of the things that comes up very frequently, is that one of the reasons why I'm standing there between two people is that, the man is going through grief. And his partner says, yeah, but he's not there for me. Or that, he's lost his job or he's lost something important to him. And he's expected to just be able to get up and pick himself up because that's what they do. And it's hard. I mean, I'm not going to say men have it easier or harder than women. I think we both have it really hard, but we look at the world a little differently. And it's very easy, I think, to judge each other, and it's much harder to walk in one another's shoes. I think it's very hard to walk in one another's shoes. I think it's very hard to sit and walk with a person and understand what's going on in the midst of their life. I think we've all had that experience. I know I certainly have had it, where you've given everything you can in the midst of a week, where you've given and done, and you think, you get through one of those weeks and you come out and somebody says something. They may not have intended it that way, but you hear it in a certain way and it's like, gosh, everything I did was just worthless because I failed on this one thing, or I missed on this one thing. I love this picture. I've used it several times. This is a picture of Moses, where he's, again, feels, and it's really going back to Exodus 15, where he feels caught. He's looking up to God, looking for God's guidance and everything. He's trying to point to the 10 Commandments. He's trying to be the interpreter of the law, and this is the point where Jethro, his father-in-law, comes to him, and he sees Moses go in and trying to judge all the cases for everybody all throughout the day, and being that person who everything depends on him. He's the one who, if he steps out of that role for a second, everything seems to fall apart. And so he goes from sun up to sundown, just hearing thing after thing after thing, and Jethro comes and pulls him aside at the end of the day and says, what you're doing is not good. What you're doing is not good. You're taking too much on your own shoulders. You're trying to do too much on your own, and you're actually holding these people back from what they can be and where they're going to go. And you need to be able to hand this off. You need to be able to give others this chance to be able to do what you're doing. Yeah, take the most important things for yourself, but let go of some of these things. As I think about the sermon for the week, I have 4 texts here typically in front of me. This week was Deuteronomy, Psalms, James, and then from Mark. And the Psalm, the reason I used that one instead of Deuteronomy this week was that the second verse really kind of just stuck with me for a minute. I love Psalm 15, but, who are those who are able to enter the house of the Lord? Those who have a blameless life. And I always struggle with that time. Anytime we translate something blameless in English, because Hebrew and Greek, neither one of them have an idea for blameless. None of them have this idea of perfection. It's just not a concept they even really think about. That's us putting an English, our own English judgmentalism on it. The idea is those who live a complete life, those who live a life that's good, those who live a life that's whole, those who are the ones who come into the house of the Lord and are welcomed in. And I think sometimes we get focused in on the judging side of, how have I missed checking a box rather than, have I lived a good life? Have I lived a life which is whole? I'm going to use a movie analogy. Movie analogies are always challenging because I know that what I've seen doesn't mean that everybody else has seen it. But there was a movie back in the 90s, Billy Crystal and Jack Palance and several other people, but City Slickers. So how many people actually saw City Slickers? So if you haven't, don't worry. I'm going to explain the scene that you need enough to where I think you can get it. So City Slickers, you have these 3 men who live in New York City. They're caught between their lives and their family and everything else, and they seem like they're getting it all wrong. Their wives basically say, you're going on this trail ride. You guys get out. Go figure things out. Go figure out what you want really in life, but go on this trail ride. So you have these 3 City Slickers that go on this trail ride, driving cows across the prairie with this, crusty old cowboy played by Jack Palance. And at one point there is this scene where, Billy Crystal's character rides up next to him and says, you know what your problem is? You don't understand what life is all about. You don't know what the meaning of life is. And so, Billy Crystal's character, well, what's the meaning of life? He says this. Hold up a finger. Oh, what? Your finger is the meaning of life? No, just one thing. Just one thing. Well, what's that one thing? Well, that's what you have to do. You have to figure out that which is central, that which is most important, that which makes life worth living. That's really what it's all about. All the other stuff, just details. It's all just the stuff that gets in the way of that one thing. For the story has a happy ending. They go back. They have their lives figured out at that point. They know what's important. But I think we always have that continual struggle of what's that that's important in life? What's that which is central? What's that which makes our life worth living? When Jesus comes and the scribes and the Pharisees are there and they start complaining about Jesus' disciples not washing their hands, on the one hand, it's awful easy to kind of bash the Pharisees about not getting things right. But we do this too. We do this too. On the one hand, it's not about washing hands, and it's not about, what you eat. It's not about all these things, but we do this too. I mean, I've been in churches long enough, and I've been in enough different churches. Some churches you come up and you bow before the altar, and others you don't. Some churches you make the sign of the cross, and others you don't. Some churches you come and you put your hand in the baptismal font and make a sign of a cross when you enter, and others you don't. Some churches you write the left candle first and then the right candle. Others you write the right candle first and then the left candle. And there is a theological rationale at each of those churches for why one is right and one is wrong. I guarantee you, because I've had that explanation from people. Why you should wear closed-toed shoes instead of sandals, or sandals instead of closed-toed shoes, or all these other different things. And we get caught up on all these different things, and all of them are not central. I've over the years have taught a number of people, whether being acolytes or different other things, and I will always tell them, hey, if you light the wrong candle first, lightning is not going to come down and strike you. It's not. That's not the central thing. That's not the most important thing. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have value, doesn't have meaning, doesn't have a place within that place, but it's not what's central. And I think that's where Jesus gets frustrated with the Pharisees, as they begin to put the things that may have meaning in that central place. And I think we do the same things in our lives sometimes. We take the things that may have, meaning or substance, but we put them ahead of other things. We put them ahead of, ultimately sometimes we put them ahead of following Jesus, getting that checklist done ahead of trying to follow or trying to pay attention to others. It's not that these things are unimportant. I think my mom would have some words with me if I said, Jesus said I don't have to wash my hands anymore. Although I know that there were lots of times when I was in the Army where, the best you could do was pour some water over your hands before you ate. I mean, that's all you could do and hope to get some of the dust off. But it's not about that. It doesn't mean that washing your hands isn't a good thing. It doesn't mean that all the things that they list there are things that most of us probably do. You wash your produce when you bring it home from the store. You wash your dishes. There's talk about washing the kettles and washing all these other things. Like, it's an unusual thing, and for most of us, it's like, well, yeah, that's what a dishwasher is for. And it's not that these things aren't important, that they don't have value, but they shouldn't be that which says that's what makes a person good. I will tell you, cleanliness is not next to godliness. You can have a spotless home and be the most horrible person in the world. Or you can have a home that's a wreck and have a heart of gold. These things, cleanliness is not bad, but it's not the same as being in that good relationship with God or being central. I'm also not going to tell you that what you eat doesn't matter. I try very hard to stay in good shape. That's hard sometimes as a pastor. I still try to run, and I know when I go and eat pizza, or when I go and have something like this and a Coke with it or something like that, the next day when I go on my run, I feel it in my muscles. I smell it in my perspiration. I know it the rest of my day in my body. I can tell it. But I'm also not going to tell you that I think in our culture we obsess so much on body image. We obsess so much on trying to be fit enough or strong enough or thin enough or all these other things. And we can take the joy out of that gift of eating by itself. Yes, what you eat is important, but it's not as important as the life you live around. It's not as important as the gathering together with people and being able to share that time and that experience together. And yet it's so much easier, I think, to be in that judging place. Be in that place where here's how I'm better than this other person, or here's how this other person is different from me, and therefore not as good, or here's how this other person should do everything. And again, sometimes it's looking in the mirror and here's how I should be doing all these things. Here's all the things that I should be doing right. Here's all the things I should be doing different. Here's everything I need to change about my life. Doesn't mean there aren't things that we need to change, but I would also tell us those are not central. Who we are is valued by God. I do think finding that one thing is important. You know, and I think for us as Christians, one of those central things is following Christ. Coming together, singing praise, worshiping. I do think for us as Christians, one of those central things is being there with other people. You know, being in community, being willing to sit across the table from somebody and share that time and that space with them. We're not going to be blameless. We're not perfect. I think that's one of the kind of things that underpins a lot of the Lutheran tradition is understanding that we're not perfect, that we are people who are made right by grace. We are set free by God's grace. God values us anyway. You know, whether we wash our hands or whether we light the right candle or the left candle, or whether we do things a certain way, or fold our clothes a certain way, or mow our yard a certain way, whether we keep a clean house or a dirty house. Ultimately, those things may be important, but they're not. Christ is. Thanks be to God. Amen.